Good evening, all. Welcome to the Williston Development Review Board. Today is October 12th, 2021. I'm Pete Kelly, Chair of the DRB. Welcome to the applicants and the public participants. Please sign in by renaming yourself on the participant toolbar or commenting in the chat. This is a hybrid meeting taking place at the town hall or police station. In this case, it's the police station. The police station meeting room and virtually on Zoom. All members of the board and the public can communicate in real time. Planning staff will provide Zoom instructions for public participation before the hearings are opened. All votes taken in this meeting that are not unanimous will be done by roll call in accordance with the law. If Zoom crashes, this meeting will be continued to October 26, 2021. Let's start by taking a roll call attendance of all DRB members participating. Paul Christensen.
Present.
John Hemmelgarn.
I'm here.
Scott Riley. Here. David Saladino. Okay, David Saladino is expected to be arriving shortly. So we'll watch out for him and announce when he joins the meeting. David Turner.
Present.
And myself, Pete Kelly. So with Mr. Saladino, we are expecting 6 participants. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Emily, for a little Zoom tutorial.
Yep, so welcome everybody to the DRB meeting in person and in Zoom. For the participants who are here in the meeting room, please keep your microphone off, your camera off, and your speaker off to avoid feedback. If you're joining remotely, there's a bunch of stuff happening on your toolbar. Keeping your microphone on mute when you're not speaking. Your video can also be off. Video on is optional. If you're having any technical difficulties, you can use the chat to let us know that you'd like to speak. You can also press the raise hand button on your toolbar if you'd like to speak. For telephone participants, press *9 to raise hand and *6 to mute or unmute. We will be using screen share tonight. You can optimize your view at the green toolbar, click view options in side-by-side mode. You can use the slider bar to prioritize the videos or the PowerPoint presentation. If you're having a bad internet connection, you can try turning off your video, closing other tabs or programs. You can also use your telephone as your speaker and microphone by clicking the up arrow on your toolbar next to the microphone. If you have any questions during the meeting, you can chat to me or Simon and we'll be able to help you out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Emily. We've got 3 items on the agenda tonight. DP 21-20, Taft Corners Associates, DP 21-17, Champlain Housing Trust, and DP 21-19, GPA LLC, care of Patrick O'Brien. First up is a public forum. This is an opportunity for anyone to address the board on topics not covered in tonight's agenda. If you would please raise your hand on Zoom if you would like to make a public comment, please.
No chats and no raised hands.
Okay, first up is DP 21-20, Taft Corners Associates. This we're going to officially open at 7:07. However, this is going to be immediately continued until the DRB meeting scheduled for November 23rd, 2021. So with that, we'll transition to the second application for tonight, DP 21-17, Champlain Housing Trust. Who is in attendance from the applicant?
I am Dan Goldsman.
Dan, if you would give your address for the record, please.
119 Caroline Street in Burlington, Vermont.
Thank you, Dan. And Andy, you're here as
Yeah,
well.
I'll only be participating as needed. I won't be doing the main presentation. But
Okay, if you'd state your name and address for the record, please.
Andy Rowe, Lemmer and Dickinson, 14 Morris Drive, Essex.
Thank you. Is Miranda present tonight?
My understanding was that Miranda was supposed to be in attendance in person. I'm not sure if she's late or what. I haven't heard anything.
Okay. Okay, well, she is currently not here.
Let me check my email.
We're gonna take pause for a moment and only checks her email.
She did email earlier asking about it, and I said to plan on 7 because this would be pretty first up. But I haven't heard back.
Okay, we're gonna hit the pause button for a moment. Andy, would you please go out and just see if there's some confusion about the location, if she's outside, please?
Let's see if I have a phone number for her.
She can blame Southwest Airlines for missing the meeting.
Emailed Miranda. I
Okay.
haven't heard from her.
We'll give Andy a moment to come back and report in.
Founder.
My apologies.
That's okay. Send out a search party for you.
Hopefully it won't be-
All right, welcome.
Thank you.
If you would state your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. Miranda Lascaz from Champlain Housing Trust at 88 King Street, Burlington, Vermont.
Great. Okay, staff is first.
All right. So this is a request for a discretionary permit to convert an existing hotel to residential dwelling units. The units will be studios or 1 bedrooms. The site is currently developed with 2 buildings, parking, and related appurtenances. No major site layout or building modifications are proposed. The current site is 2.45 acres. The use is commercial. They're proposing residential and has access on town roads. Located in the Taft Corner zoning district. Tonight, staff is recommending that the DRB take testimony and close the hearing and approve this application. There are some findings, conclusions, and conditions related to parking, landscaping, outdoor lighting, as well as the growth management exemption for the DRB's consideration. Project history, this lot was created in 1997, and that's when the hotel was developed as well. This went through pre-application review in August. The Conservation Commission and Historic and Architectural Advisory Committee did not review this application, given the nature of the development. Public Works, Fire, and Police commented on this application. We included the Public Works and Fire comments in the conditions of approval. However, we excluded the Police Department because their comment letter primarily deals with the management and enforcement of the town's parking policy and winter parking ban, which is outside the DRB's and the zoning administrator's scope of review. There was one comment letter received at the time of mail out, and there were two comment letters received after the mail out, one from Philip Provencher, who's here tonight, and one from Brett Grabowski. Here is a summary of the pre-application recommendations. The applicant has responded to the majority of them. In particular, there was a recommendation about additional parking, expansion for bicycles, as well as outdoor trash receptacles in the patio areas, and they've provided that information. So this is the Taft Corner zoning district where residential uses are allowed and encouraged. There also is an accessory use of property management and residence services. Both are allowed in that zoning district, and they are allowed as accessory uses. There'll be an on-site property manager and a resident service coordinator, as well as an on-site overnight presence accessory to the residential apartment building. No site layout changes are proposed. The existing building and parking areas will remain. And this proposal does comply with the development pattern standards of the Taft Corner zoning district. At pre-application, we noted a requirement for direct pedestrian connection to the principal building entrances. So they've shown on their site plan additional sidewalks from the parking lot to Day Lane. And the 509 criteria do not apply to redevelopment, only new development. Here we quote the DRB's ability to correct nonconformities, section 2.8 of the zoning bylaws. The applicant is correcting the access nonconformity by constructing sidewalks along Zephyr Road. There is some information about outdoor lighting and landscaping that we'll go over later. Some minor nonconformities where staff is recommending the nonconformities remain as is. Because this site was developed prior to the existing bylaw. For growth management, 71 units are proposed to be affordable at or below area median, 80% area median income. And that 72nd unit will be an element of that property management, social assistance, accessory use. We have drafted findings and conclusions for this exemption because units below 80% AMI are exempt from growth management allocation. So this project is proceeding from pre-application to discretionary permit without going to growth management in March. They've provided their housing subsidy covenant by the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board that will restrict the prices of those units, and they also go above and beyond Williston zoning and limit the income, whereas our zoning is only based on that sale price or rental price of the units. All in all, they comply with growth management. Access, bicycle and pedestrian access complies as proposed. Public Works did comment about the right-of-way with the sidewalk along Zephyr Road. And we have been, it looks like Dave Saladino is joining in from the waiting room. Anyways, Public Works and the applicant are working together on that sidewalk along Zephyr Road. The vehicular access complies as proposed. It does have two curb cuts, one on Zephyr, one on Day Lane. At pre-application, it was requested that they provide a study about the vision triangles with Day Lane, and they've identified that 4 parking spaces should be eliminated in order to improve the site distances. At traffic studies, at pre-application, Public Works did not request a traffic study, nor did the DRB require one. Overall, the purpose of the traffic study is to look at if vehicle trips would warrant intersection improvements to manage traffic delays. The applicant did provide a memo about vehicle trip generation. Overall, multifamily housing generates fewer PM peak hour trips than a hotel. Off-street parking and loading. We're making a specific recommendation about this. And there is a variation from the standard parking table. So we are recommending that the DRB approve 106 on-site parking spaces. And we've identified plus or minus for ADA with an additional 26 on-street parking spaces as an offset. After comparing the proposed use to a similar use, senior housing, and the ITE parking generation manual, as permitted by 1423, staff determines that the existing 106 parking spaces are sufficient. Even if 1 or 2 spaces were lost to accommodate a fifth ADA space, 95 to 106 parking spaces are sufficient. 95 spaces would be required at the ITE rate of 1.31 spaces per unit. And Champlain Housing Trust formula estimates a demand for 90 parking spaces, both of which are below the existing 106. So what 1423 in the bylaw says is the required number of off-street parking spaces shall be determined by the administrator or DRB based on the similarity of the proposed use to one or more uses listed in table 14.a and the ITE parking generation. We're recommending compliance as proposed. They include 26 on-street parking spaces, which is above and beyond as an additional offset. Our bylaw requires 1.75 spaces per unit in a multi-family dwelling, which would be 126 spaces. Champlain Housing Trust portfolio of 2,500 multi-family units in the Chittenden County area, a varying bedroom count. Based on their portfolio, they require 1 space per unit plus 1 visitor space for every 4 units. That's how they get to 90 spaces. What was noted in their parking memo, what we summarize here, is table 14.8 doesn't differentiate on the number of bedrooms, nor does it account for affordable multifamily housing. So that rate of 1.75 spaces per unit in table 14.8 is the same whether it's applied to a 3-bedroom unit or a 1-bedroom or studio unit. And the ITE parking manual estimates 1.31 spaces per unit or 0.75 spaces per bedroom. Therefore, we're finding that the existing parking will comply with 1423 in the bylaw. Accessible parking, final plans must specify accessible parking in compliance with the federal ADA recommendations. The site has 4 spaces. Table 14.b would require 5. If the applicant would like 44 ADA spaces, then they must demonstrate that that complies with the federal requirements. And shared parking also that complies as proposed, so that accessory use of an on-site property manager and on-site residential services would be considered office. And it can share with the residential parking and no additional parking is needed because offices, their peak demand is weekdays, daytime, whereas the residential peak demand is in the nights and weekends. Bicycle parking and end-of-trip facilities. There's condition number 9 to require final plans, have specifications for the long-term bicycle storage and the placement of short-term bicycle racks on the patio. In short, we need to know where the indoor room will be for bicycle storage. At pre-application, the DRB requested plans for bicycle parking expansion. The applicant proposed the new racks near one of the buildings and the expansion area near the other building. What we're recommending is that the proposed racks and the future expansion racks be equally distributed between both buildings and that they should be located to the side of the patio areas, not centers, so the patios can be usable outdoor space for residents. Fairly minor, but we've included a condition of approval. And final plans for end-of-trip facilities, they are not required for residential uses. Here's the parking table that summarizes their parking. Our bylaw would require 1.75 spaces per unit. We're finding that 106 complies with 26 on street as an additional offset. On-site infrastructure, this property is served by municipal water and sewer, and no changes to the utility connections are proposed. They have adequate sewer allocation. Maintenance, there's a specific condition of approval. For litter, it complies as proposed. As requested at pre-app, they've shown trash receptacles outdoors on the patio areas. Snow storage, a condition is included. They've provided snow storage on their site plan. However, DPW commented that it's too small, and in the past, maintenance has plowed snow onto the sidewalk on Day Lane. So final plans must show adequate snow storage area and/or plan for off-site removal of snow to the satisfaction of Public Works. Solid waste also complies as proposed. They have a screened dumpster enclosure on the northwest corner of the site. The applicant should be aware that if more trash or recycling dumpsters are needed in the future, they must also be screened. Density transfer of development rights. So this complies with density as proposed. I will note that there is an error here. Instead of 24 studios and 48 one-bedrooms, there's 29 studios and 43 one-bedrooms. 71 units will be perpetually affordable at or below 80% area median income. And that 72nd unit is reserved for the on-site manager staff housing. Final plans must include a report comparing the rented prices to the median household income for Chittenden County as defined by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And what follows is the density calculation, 15 dwelling units per acre, where a studio or a one-bedroom is a half dwelling unit equivalent. Landscaping, we're recommending a specific condition here. We're recommending that the landscape remain as is and not require the applicant to correct the nonconformities. They've provided a site plan that documents existing vegetation. There's some portions where there's a partial buffer or no buffer. This is primarily along the abutting where they abut a commercial property and a neighboring residential apartment building. And we're recommending that it remain as is. Street trees complies as proposed, so their north and east property lines are along public ways, and they have street trees in compliance with Chapter 26. There will be 4 trees that are removed and replanted when the new sidewalk goes in along Zephyr Road. Signs, no master sign plan is proposed nor required. There's a statement about impact fees and their assessment at administrative permit. And outdoor lighting, we're also recommending that this remain as is and not require the applicant to correct the nonconformities. The level of nonconformity is minor. Some fixtures and the uniformity ratio do not comply with the lighting standards. For example, the 4 existing building facade fixtures are mounted at 18.5 feet, where today they would be limited to 15 feet. I believe they're on the sides of the building that are away from the public street, and they might even be interior to the 2 buildings. And there are 7 existing pole-mounted fixtures that utilize non-cutoff luminaries, where fully shielded would be required today. The fire lane is not illuminated, which plays into that uniformity ratio, but there's no points that are overly bright. There are no upward-facing fixtures. So overall, those nonconformities are very minor. Here's the summary of the parking table or the lighting table. And what follows is findings of fact, conclusions of law, and conditions of approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Emily. First, Miranda, do you have any concerns about the proposed conditions of approval?
No, I don't.
Okay. At this point, I'd like to open it up to DRB members for questions.
Miranda, this is Dave Turner. I just have a question for you around guidelines for your tenants. Some of the letters we got from local people and stuff were concerned about some of the tenants in their possible criminal records. I seem to remember from past that CHT would not let tenants or keep tenants that had criminal records. Is that the case still?
So I'd like to stop and get guidance from Matt on the appropriateness of this question. And is that in our purview? And is there any type of law against discrimination, et cetera, that we might be pushing the boundaries on with that question? I want to cut that off if so.
Yeah, I think I can give you two answers. The first to your question, is there anything in the bylaw about the record, criminal or otherwise, of a person who would live in a proposed residence? No, there's not. There's no bylaw criteria based on that. And generally, discriminating against somebody based on any number of attributes can run municipalities afoul of either Federal Fair Housing Act or state rules as well. So, you know, the short answer though is there's nothing in the zoning bylaw about the record or past of the resident of a home or facility. In fact, Vermont law requires zoning to provide some equal treatment to some other types of housing, including things like residential group homes, which under Vermont law must be treated just like a single family home in certain contexts.
Okay, so Dave Turner, I'm gonna rule, if you object, please state so, but I'm gonna rule that we're gonna, I'm not gonna ask the applicant to answer that based on what Matt just provided as a safeguard for the town.
Understandable.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the DRB, please?
Can we go through the parking again? The parking calculations and the rationale behind it?
Yep.
On
Right.
premises. And
Thanks, Scott. That was my question as well.
So let's do a little bit of a deeper dive into that. Let's pull up the calculation, and I want to focus on what the regulations say and allow the DRB to do, and how that relates to this application. So walk us through that, Emily, please.
Okay, right, so what 14.2.3 says is the required number of off-street parking spaces shall be determined by the administrator. An administrator means Matt, the zoning administrator, or the DRB, based on a similarity of the proposed use to one or more uses listed in table 14.a and the Institute of Transportation Engineers parking generation. So we compared this in the parking table. There's single family, multifamily, and senior housing. And we compared it to senior housing because senior housing is typically studios or one-bedroom units. And that parking rate is 1 space per unit. Multifamily is 1.75 spaces per unit. But our bylaw doesn't differentiate between 3 bedrooms or 1 bedroom. So you could have an apartment building of all 3 or 4 bedroom units, and that would generate more parking demand than a building like this where it's all studios or 1 bedrooms. And that ITE rate is 1.31 spaces per unit when it's looked at a unit as a whole. In their parking table, they also provided the ITE
Emily,
rate.
I'm sorry, can you back up and just go through that one more time? I got the senior housing at 1:1, apartment buildings at 1 to 1.75. Then you said
1.31.
for
Studios per unit in a studio or 1 bedroom. And that parking table states it. Right, so it's a a multifamily dwelling unit building. Housing mid-rise, and this is the ITE parking generation manual for general urban suburban. So it's an area where it's a vehicle-centered access where nearly all trips are personal or commercial vehicles, very little transit or multimodal use. So that's where IT got that 1.31 spaces per unit.
For a studio and or one bedroom.
Just straight multifamily.
Just straight multifamily. I think that table gets 0.75 where it's per bedroom.
Okay, I'm sorry to be dense. It's 0.75 per bedroom. So I apartment buildings are 1 to 1.75, right?
Senior housing is 1 to
1
1.
to 1.
Multifamily in our bylaw is 1 to 1.75.
Yeah.
And then in ITE, it's
The
1
ICE
to
is 1 to 1.31
31 per unit
for studios or for all.
for all bedrooms. And then 1 to 0.75 per bedroom.
1 to 0.75 per bed per.
Yeah. So 1 to 5 per bedroom, that would be 54 parking spaces. And then 1 to 1.31 is 95 parking spaces. And Champlain Housing Trust portfolio estimates the demand for 90 spaces.
So the way I look at this, because I'm a simpleton, is that worst case, we got a 1 to 1.75 ratio. The applicant has proposed a way to meet that is compliant with our regulations. But when you cross-reference other standards and parking conditions at other similar locations within a large portfolio of Champlain Housing Trust, that data suggests that the 1.75 is far in excess of what will be realized. And so I'm a bit at a loss for this being a complicated topic.
I think it's complicated for a couple of reasons. It's complicated. It gets complicated or a little muddy because of the off-street parking request. So that I think is one. Because I think that off-street parking is already being used by other people.
And
so,
goes away in the wintertime, right?
And it goes away for the wintertime, but the hamlet's already using it. So you're giving away parking that somebody else is already being used, using. I mean, that street is busy already. There's a lot of parking already on it. So explain to me how you can give away parking that has already been given away, or already been allocated to an existing development. So I guess that's one. And then
Can I address that? Sure. Okay, thank you. So our ability to rule is based on the regulations. And the regulations do not make any distinction about what I would consider to be off-street allocation. So has that off-street allocation been previously allocated or not? There's nothing in our bylaw that gives us the right to assess that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the bylaw also does not provide us with any seasonal adjustment for a winter parking ban.
But we got it in.
I'm a rule follower.
I'm not buying that.
I don't know how that argument could be countered.
So anyway, so I said, my question on the off street is that my comment on the off street is that it's already allocated. Whether that's in the rules or not, other people are already using it. We're going to give it to somebody else. and then my only other question is, I just wanted to understand how the calculation was going on. For the on premises parking. And then Matt, do you, so 14.2.3 gives you the ability, the administrator, the ability to make a determination that is different from what our bylaws say, and as I read it, it's subject to appeal. Is that what I'm reading?
Yes, so the first point that Emily made was that where it says administrator, remember the administrator is always working as an agent of the DRB when they're making land use decisions. So you can make a decision about parking generation on the site based on the evidence the applicant's given you and the facts that Emily's covered in the staff report. So when you're looking at that parking table, what we know in the bylaw is that not every use of land is captured by that table. We have these sort of general categories: single family residential, multi-family residential, retail, office, restaurant, etc. And we have uses that come before us, either at the administrative level when someone's just changing the use of an existing building, or at the DRB when it's a big enough change to come to the DRB, or it's a new building where it's not quite the same. And you know, I have to dig a little bit far back in my history of the time we looked at this, but for example, when Echo Car Wash constructed, the applicant said, you know, the ITE number, we didn't have something good in the table about parking generation at a car wash. The ITE number was based on 2 studies in northern New Jersey in 1985 and didn't seem relevant to Williston, Vermont in 2009. And the applicant had data from all of their other operations in Vermont and northern New England, and was able to say, well, you know, here's my traffic, here's my parking. And the bylaw allows the DRB to consider that. So in that 14.2, et cetera, language, the administrator, or in this case, the DRB, can look at the fit of the use that's proposed to the categories in the table and can decide to assign a parking generation rate that's different in that table if the board feels that that use is a little bit different than what's in the table. So your parking table talks about parking for multifamily residential. It makes no distinction about bedroom count, which would naturally have some bearing on it. So it doesn't matter if it's a bunch of studios or a bunch of 3 and 4 bedroom apartments, it's 1.75 per unit in that table, no matter what. But I think more importantly, the table doesn't capture that this is an apartment building that is managed by a housing agency that is operated for a particular purpose, and that tends to serve a demographic that does not, as a whole, own or operate cars as much as the general public. And that, I think, is what's borne out in the information they've provided to you about parking generation at their existing sites. So we offer a couple of numbers in the staff report. Well, let's look at what happens with senior housing. Let's look at what the ITE says. We can look at what Williston says. We can look at what Champlain Housing Trust says. And the DRB, you know, based on all of that information, can make a finding. We think the right or the adequate number here is whatever number that is, and it might not be the number for multifamily apartment building that's in table 14A.
Okay.
And so where I was coming from, just in the spirit of transparency, is that, you know, based on adjustments that are allowed within the DRB purview, the on-site parking, one could make a case, and I believe that it's a good case that the parking on site is adequate for this use and the population that's going to occupy the facility. But if you didn't buy that argument, then still the most stringent is 1.75, and there's a path to satisfying the 1.75 that is in our bylaw. And so that's the way I'm looking at it. I'm welcome to listen to counter arguments on this, and the general public will have an opportunity to weigh in on this.
Yeah.
And if you feel that we
Well, I
should
guess-
talk about this in executive session, then that's an option as well.
Yeah, so I guess I would, the way I guess I'm concerned is the following. I'm concerned about the offsite parking calculation, because I think whether it's in the rules or not, or whether that's your interpretation, I think that you're passing judgment on allowing more cars into an area that probably already has a lot of cars. I am not disagreeing at this point. I'm not disagreeing about the on-site parking. I think that it's probably sufficient. My concern is allowing those extra 20 parking spaces back onto the road. And then, there's sight lines that are come up in here too. We're taking away 4 more parking spaces on the road from people who are already using them. So there are 2 issues there. Not just my opinion.
Funny, this was not an issue when there was a building being built that happened to have the jazzercise, and we were common sharing the parking lot. And I remember people on this board eloquently speaking about how, oh yeah, parking sharing's okay. Plus there was on-street parking available to them. So I think that we need to just move on with this, because it's not our job to regulate on-street parking as to who is in those spaces. We can let the Williston police know, instead of wasting their time trying to find the owners, they just show up with the tow truck. After the first vehicle's towed, I guarantee you that all the people that have cars parked there will have moved them in a winter event.
Absolutely.
So Paul, I would heartily disagree with you. I think those are apples and oranges. I think the jazzercise discussion was a business, and it certainly was a shared parking arrangement where the parking during the day, where the parking was used during the day and the residential was used in the afternoon and evening, and it ebbed and flowed. So I think there is an argument there for that. This is different. We're in a totally residential section.
That residential building was utilizing on-street parking. I remember that part.
Okay, other members of the DRB with general questions or parking specific questions, please weigh in now, please.
Yeah.
John?
Yeah, so I'll weigh in that I share some of Scott's concerns on this, and while I don't understand how it is that I agree that the hamlet should be able to use those on-street parking spots. My understanding of on-street parking, and I have no idea if this is supported in the bylaw or not, is that it's a first come, first serve. That's why it's there. It's available for people who want to use it. And so I'm uncomfortable at first here of a kind of giving priority to people at the that would be living in this project, giving them priority to those spaces. I mean, I don't even know how that would ever begin to work. On the other hand, I do appreciate the analysis that's been done here on how we might more realistically project the number of parking spaces that are required. I looked at what Emily was describing there with the 1.31. That seems to be very similar to the type of use that we have proposed here. Multifamily, an urban suburban setting with limited multimodal access. It seems like that would be a much more appropriate than the 1.75 that I see in the WDB. The one question I would have is for Champlain Housing Trust and their formula of 1 point, whatever that was, 1 space per unit plus 1 visitor space for every 4 units. It comes out to 90. And that was based on 2,500 units, but my question is whether those units are truly applicable or similar to what is being proposed here. And I think a better number would be to take the units that they have that are similar to this and try to distill a number down from that, because I suspect there are locations that they have that are much closer to the public transit and whatnot that might skew that number down. But I personally, at this point, I'm very comfortable with the 1.31. It does come out well below the number of spaces on site. And I'm sure we'll talk about this in deliberations, but I'm inclined to not allocate those 26 spaces off the street to this project. That makes me uncomfortable. But I don't think they're needed, so.
I agree.
So Matt and Emily, I just heard the term allocate. And can you, I didn't understand it to be an allocation. Could you speak to that, please?
Sure. It's not an allocation so much as it is an offsite of what's required to be provided on site. So what the bylaw does here is it acknowledges that we have streets that make street parking available, and that some amount of what would be otherwise required on site could be not required on site because there are publicly available spaces adjacent. So it doesn't speak to reserving those spaces for any particular use. They are, as John Hamilton said, first come, first serve. In some parts of town, street parking is more heavily used than others. I think the experience has been that in this part of town, those spaces have been fairly heavily used. When Emily and I visited the site to look at the sidewalk, we found a number of long-term hotel resident vehicles parked in the street parking because they were pulling U-Haul trips. You know, people in transition, they have all their stuff in a trailer. They'd rather not navigate the parking lot of the hotel with that. And that was some of the use that we observed. But it's an offset saying our bylaw gives you this number, but you could reduce this number if you've got some street parking nearby. It does not assume in the bylaw that those spaces will always be available to that particular use, or that that's the only use that's generating demand on it.
So residents on this, associated with this application, would not be given priority on the street parking. It would be a first come, first serve, and there would be no formal allocation process of those spaces. It's a public street, and if a space is available, you have the right to it.
Right.
I'd like to note that, so the parking table on page 7, it does say 26 on-street parking. But the findings of facts, conclusions of law, and conditions of approval are all based on comparing it to senior living and looking at the ITE parking generation. So finding of fact 4, the applicant proposes to retain 106 existing on-site parking spaces, which may be adjusted for the provision of additional ADA parking spaces. The proposed use, studio and 1-bedroom multifamily units managed by an affordable housing nonprofit, is comparable to a senior living facility. The applicant has provided ITE parking generation that supports 54 to 95 vehicular parking spaces. Conclusion of law. For WDB 1423, there is a use where a use is not listed in table 14.a, the required number of off-street parking spaces shall be determined by the DRB administrator based on the similarity of the proposed use to one or more uses listed in the table and the ITE generation manual. And then condition of approval 9, for WDB 1423, 106 parking spaces may vary for ADA parking, is approvable. And then there's some other ones about the bicycle parking. So that the table does talk about the offset for on-street parking because that was discussed at pre-application. But our findings of fact, conclusion of law, and conditions of approval aren't predicated on the on-street parking. It's all based on the ITE manual.
Thank you for that clarification.
Would it be helpful to respond to John's question
Yes.
about Champlain Housing Trust's portfolio? So the data that we provide is for All properties are different. There is some similarities between some properties, but it included data from all bedroom mixes, so from studios up to 4-bedroom apartments, but comparable locations throughout Chittenden County. It does not include our downtown Burlington locations where often no on-site parking is provided. So if at this location, because they are studio and 1-bedroom apartments, if all households had a car, which is unlikely, it would require 72 on-site spaces. And the existing on-site spaces are 106 spaces. So that would leave 34 spaces available to visitors. I hope that helps in talking a little bit about the data that we provided of our portfolio. They are comparable locations, but really widely varying bedroom mixes. And the 106 spaces that are on site would be, in my calculation, about 1.55, since we're talking about those different ratios, without needing the day lane offsite parking spaces.
Are those, just a quick follow-up question, are those numbers based on the number of physical spaces, like the number of painted spaces at those sites, or the number of cars parked in the spaces? Is it demand, based on demand, or supply?
Supply. It's the number of physical spaces on site at our properties.
Yeah.
And they're at all properties, they're more than sufficient.
Mhm.
Except downtown Burlington locations where sometimes no parking is provided at all.
Maybe while I have the mic, just a follow-up question maybe, and just curious if you've ever encountered this type of parking issue before, and whether something like and I don't know if this is even legal, but like, some kind of lease requirement that, owner shall not own more than one car, that limits any tenants to, within their rental agreement or whatever kind of agreement there is, that they're prohibited from owning more than one car.
We don't have such restrictions in our rental agreements. Our rental agreements do provide for a parking space for certain apartments, but I don't think can dictate the number of cars.
Thank you.
Okay, other DRB members, questions, please.
I had a very nitpicky, very small comment that's not even, it's more public works purview, but the crosswalk for the new sidewalk is shown as striped crosswalk. And I think the standard is to carry the concrete through the driveway and not stripe it as a crosswalk. So definitely something to talk through with public works, but I think that might want to take another look at that.
Thank you, Dave. Scott, are you satisfied with this discussion, or would you?
No, I'm fine with it.
Okay.
Pete, I
Okay.
have no further questions.
Thank you, John. Going to give any remaining questions, an opportunity for any remaining questions from DRB members before I open it up to public comment.
Oh, Dave, you're muted.
Sorry. I just have one quick question about the sidewalk on the plan. It looks like it stops shy of the property line. Is that on purpose or for some particular reason? It's on sheet 2, and when you look at the western side of the property down Zephyr Road.
Andy?
There's a property corner there and.
It looks like the property corner there, yeah.
Right, so we're stopping short of the property corner in order to avoid having all the work stay within either the Zephyr Road public right of way or the property that will become CHPs and not extend onto the adjacent property. And there's not enough right of way width to continue that sidewalk all the way to Route 2A to maintain the green strip that Public Works has asked for in terms of snow storage, construct the sidewalk, and get the back slope for grading on the backside of the sidewalk.
So what is it short, like 4 or 8 feet from the property boundary because of the right of way?
About 4 feet probably. Not more than 4 feet, just based upon the width being 5 feet and the distance that it's set back from the property corner.
Okay.
Any other questions from the DRB members? Okay, hearing none. So we're going to open it up to public comments at this point. If you are present in this room and you have a comment, I would ask you to raise your hand and if called upon, state your name and address for the record, please. If you are participating by Zoom virtually, then use the raise hand function on Zoom, and Emily will call you. Once you're called, please identify same rules of engagement, your name and address, please, for the record. And if people would address questions to me, please, I will then relay them to likely to be to the applicant.
It looks like M is probably trying to press the raise hand button. If you want to go, you can speak.
Thank you very much. Could you guys hear me?
Yes.
This is Brett Grabowski. I'm with My Lot Real Estate Village Associates. I was actually a developer of the Hamlet project, and so I know we've kind of beaten this issue a little bit, but I'm going to go back to the parking issue, which is obviously the biggest concern that I have. Not only for the existing residents of the hamlet who have purchased homes there, but also for my continued interest due to the fact that I own property and businesses are located on Zephyr Road. So I just would like to get a better understanding, because I think a couple of concerns that I have. One, Mr. Chair, you've talked about, or I guess let me back up a little bit. Basically, staff's recommendation of approval really all hinges on calculations that they feel are justified based upon the section 14.2.3. Is that correct?
Let me read the condition of approval. Yes, proposed condition of approval 9 cites WDB 14.2.3. That's correct.
And so, so is this, but table 14A does list multifamily, correct? So are you basically is staff basically saying that it doesn't quite fit the perfect mold of 14A, therefore 14.2.3 allows us to kind of mold this a little bit better so that it fits within the box?
I don't know if I categorize it as fitting within them. It allows for some discretion. When you look at the 1.75 factor, that does not consider the number of bedrooms. And so there were some cross references to other standards and an adjustment based on judgment at that point. And that is allowed. That is an allowable thing to do.
All right, no, thank you. And then, but now with that being said, you made some comments in regards to if these adjustments or adjustments that have been made based upon assumptions here with numbers of ITE as well as with Champlain housing. You made a comment about the fallback being is that those on-street spaces would be potentially available to support the project.
Yeah, and that was probably a misstatement on my part. That is what I said.
That's fine. I just brought that up, but it kind of segued me into my additional comments. That's all. So certainly not to, I'm not really holding you to that comment, but I just wanted to bring that up because the obviously the biggest concern is, and I submitted an email to the board. I don't know if they've had a chance to receive it from Emily or been able to read it, but it very much falls in line with some of the comments that Scott was making just previously. And I don't know if Emily, has the board received that email?
I haven't seen it.
I have not seen it.
Okay. It brings up very much, I'm sure Emily can distribute it or send it to you guys at some point, hopefully maybe during deliberative session. But it's along the exact same lines of the same argument that Scott brought up in regards to, you know, part of the requirements for the Hamlet project is that, you know, I create, you know, Day Lane was actually designed and built wider than the standard street at the time, or standard street specifications at the time, because of the need to provide on-street parking. So I believe Day Lane is actually built at 32 feet versus the standard 30 feet of at the time. And that was to accommodate the additional requirement that Day Lane actually needed in regards to visitor parking, overflow parking for the project, and as well as accommodating the businesses. There's 6,000 square feet of businesses in the two buildings along Zephyr Road. And we actually went back to the DRB at a later date to create additional parking along Zephyr Road to service those businesses and their parking requirements. So I have issue with, and this is along the same lines of thinking that Scott have, is I have issues with being able to hand out on-street parking to multiple different projects at infinitum, right? So you have very dense projects being built here, and a lot of different projects, depending on the uses, could need that overflow parking. And if you give it out again and again and again, it's not really there. And thus that's a concern of mine, because the parking along Day Lane and Zephyr Road is being significantly utilized by the residents and the businesses. And for them to suddenly not be able to have that because it was allowed to be utilized again by multiple other projects during the permitting process would significantly impact those residents and businesses in regards to accessibility. So, you know, I think the strict bylaws make a comment about if it's within 600 feet. That's, you know, I understand about, you know, trying to allow these businesses to, or allowed to utilize on-street parking, but it's still a finite amount. And when it's been actually allocated out to help other businesses meet their requirements, it cannot be done again and again and again, because then you're really double, triple, quadruple dipping into what I just referenced as a finite resource. So I don't know if you guys, if you can comment on that further, but obviously that's one of the biggest concerns, because if the assumptions of 14.2.3 don't work out, there isn't a fallback. There really isn't. That parking is already utilized, there will be a definite immediate impact to the businesses and residences that are already have already located to that area.
Well stated. I understand your position. I perhaps overcomplicated things by failing to recognize the condition of approval number 9 was written such that the on-street parking would not be necessary. But from a strict adherence to the bylaws in which this board is has to base our decisions on, we don't, to the best of my knowledge, have the ability to be able to make the assessment that you are representing. That is, the street's already full. that's not in our purview, as I understand it from the development bylaw. However, staff has made a recommendation to the DRB, and we're going to have to deliberate on it as to a case that parking is not needed.
So that would be, so in essence, what you're saying that an approval by this board of this project would the DRB would essentially be falling back on the recommendations of staff and their ability to utilize 14.2.3 to modify the table requirements, and thus that on-street parking would become a moot point and would not be really would not need to be part of your deliberative discussions here later on this evening.
I think I understand what you just said. It's a recommendation. We're ultimately going to have to decide whether to accept that recommendation or amend it. And if we accept it, then what you just stated is correct.
Yeah. So it's not really maybe this is also a question for staff. This really wouldn't be since it falls under 14.2.3, it really wouldn't be considered a waiver, a straight waiver of sorts.
That's correct. So if the board chooses to follow an alternate calculation of parking demand and is able to find that that demand is met on site, the board does not need to make a finding about any demand being met by publicly available off-site parking. So if the board says this is the calculation we're using based on either the ITE number, Champlain Housing Trust number, or parallel to senior housing in table 14A, the board would say we're using this number. This is why we're using this number. We're going to, we then arrive at a number of spaces required that can be served on site, and that's the end of the discussion about parking.
Yep. But if it's falling under as 14.2.3 lists here, if it falls under that if it falls under that section in regards to granting the rights to do it, then obviously as it's listed here, it's obviously it's an appealable decision essentially.
Any decision made by the DRB is global, and based on any finding of fact or conclusion of law that the board is in support of its decision.
Yep. Okay. All right, Matt. Yeah, thank you, Matt. That's great. I appreciate it. Thanks for the time. Like I've said, I've certainly expressed my opinion, and you guys have answered in my questions the best of your knowledge and ability, and I'm pretty good idea where the information that's been given to the board, and you guys will proceed accordingly. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Riley, you have a question or input?
Yeah, and I had just a quick point of clarification question. If the board finds that there is enough parking on site and that the off-street parking is not required, do the site triangles need to still be done? Is that a public works requirement, or is that if it is not, if the parking is not required on street, you still need to do the site triangle?
I think so, because that's more about vehicles maneuvering in and out. At the end of the day, modifying the parking would be a decision of public works. So the applicant provided that vision triangle study showing that spaces would need to be removed. But at the end of the day, it's a public road, and that would be a decision of public works.
I'm not to interject again. I apologize. I'm not aware of any. Maybe Public Works could answer this, or police, or I'm not aware. I was never made aware of by any of the residents or anyone else in regards to concerns over those 4 parking spaces with the access through at that location and that driveway. So I mean, I understand the analysis that was done as far as the traffic study and the board requesting on the study, the triangle analysis study. But I was not aware of any issues or any conflicts that existed in the past in that location. But I do believe, yeah, it probably, as you stated, Emily, it is ultimately a public works decision, since the town now owns the road and they kind of make those decisions.
Could that same argument be made about the sidewalk? I know we've asked the applicant to do the sidewalk. Could that same argument be made about the sidewalk? I think when we first started the discussion, the sidewalk was actually not on the table, and some push from the board got it on.
Right, so the DRB is requiring the sidewalk and it needs to be built in conformance with the public works specifications.
So Scott, is your question, is the requirement to provide a sidewalk up to the DPW?
I'm making a point.
Okay.
And the point is that the DRB is requiring a sidewalk to be built, which I think is the right decision. But is it the DRB that's requiring the site triangles be built, or is it the public works? And there's no modification of the entry points being proposed. It's simply an adjustment to comply with what might now be new public works standards.
Correct. So, in a number of cases on this site, you're dealing with varying degrees of non-conformity.
I get that.
Both to the
I got
zoning
that.
bylaw and the public works specs, and you have some decisions over where to ask for conformity.
Right.
Based on the advice of your commenting departments and
And
staff.
ultimately, I'm trying to preserve parking for the people that are already there.
I got it. Okay, other public comments, please raise your hand, or if you by Zoom, or if you want to raise your hand in your camera, that we can probably go that route as well.
I'm seeing no raised hands and no comments in the chat.
Okay, is there one last call to the public for comments? Anyone present in the room like to speak, or, okay, anyone on Zoom? Okay, I'll turn it back over to the DRB. You've digested some information. Do you have any additional comments to offer? Okay. Hearing none. I've got 8:15. I'm going to close DP 21-17. Thank you all for your participation. Okay, next up is DP 21-19. GPA LLC, care of Patrick O'Brien. Andy, are you participating in this one as well?
I am.
Okay. Now, looks like there's 3 members of your team. If you would please introduce yourself and your address for the record, please.
My name is Patrick O'Brien. I'm here representing GPA LLC, address of 193 Industrial Avenue in Williston, Vermont.
Bill Brothers, architect, representing GPA, same address. Andy Rowe, Lenro Dickinson, 14 Morris Drive, Essex.
Okay, welcome all. Staff goes next.
So DP 2019.
GPA LLC, care of Patrick Bryan, requests a pre-application review to develop 3 commercial industrial buildings, approximately 103,750 square feet total, with parking, loading areas, and related appurtenances on lot 4 of the Robear subdivision. A vacant 8.74 acre parcel located on Williston Road, opposite Monson Drive in the Industrial Zoning District West. The current use is vacant, and industrial is the proposed use. And staff is advising the DRB to approve this application with recommendations as drafted. So in the project history, I've included the date of the subdivision, DP 1821, which created the Robear subdivision. Date of approval, November 13th, 2019. And then the development of each of the lots in that subdivision, just for reference. The Conservation Commission did not review this project because they reviewed the original Robear subdivision, and their recommendations are applicable to all lots created by the subdivision and are included in the draft recommendations. The HAP reviewed and commented on the proposed project, and their comments and recommendations are discussed in the design review section and also included as recommendations. Public Works and Fire reviewed the project, and their comment memos are attached and included as recommendations. No public comment letters were received at the time of mail out. So the applicant is proposing construction of 3 separate buildings for a variety of commercial and light industrial uses, but no uses or tenants have been identified at this time. At discretionary permit and administrative permit, proposed uses must comply with the allowed uses of Chapter 36. And the applicant should be aware that some heavy commercial industrial uses may have specific needs for parking, outdoor storage, and or wastewater that should be anticipated for during discretionary permit. The dimensional standards, the applicant is proposing 3 2-story buildings that can comply with the building height requirement as proposed. Overhead doors and loading docks are proposed. Compliance with the setback and height requirements must be demonstrated at discretionary permit. Outdoor storage is not proposed at this time. If proposed at discretionary permit, outdoor storage is permitted only within side and rear yards designated for that purpose on an approved site plan and screened in compliance with 36.7.2. For design review, the HAC reviewed this project and their comments are included as recommendation number 4. And staff recommends including the HAC's comments, particularly about landscaping, to continue the pattern of tree spacing and plantings along the Williston Road frontage. Although the architectural design for the buildings on lot 4 is unknown at this time, we can anticipate long commercial buildings with parking in the front. And just to remind the DRB that in reviewing DP 20-03, the U-Haul facility on the adjacent parcel, the DRB adopted conditions of approval similar to the HAC's recommendations related to landscaping, as in varying the tree and landscaping spacing, having 20-foot tree, street tree spacing plus additional screening, and installing low-lying bushes at 10-15-foot intervals between the sidewalk and the Williston Road right of way. For other things related to landscaping, the discretionary permit must provide a landscaping plan that demonstrates compliance with Chapter 23. The property is currently undeveloped and wooded, and staff is recommending the applicant identify and retain existing vegetation and buffers where feasible. Specifically, all existing vegetation must be retained within the watershed protection buffer, west and south of the developed portion of the site. And staff is recommending that, so the parcel abuts lot 9 at the western and southern sides. And it doesn't look like there's a lot of room for, or there's enough room within the parcel, with the way that they have the parking and the buildings positioned, that they would be able to fit a 50-foot buffer of existing vegetation on their parcel. But since the abutting parcel is a conservation lot and won't have any development, staff is recommending that they be allowed to extend that landscaping buffer onto lot 9, as long as the 50-foot wetland buffer is retained, and or restored where necessary. The DRB may also wish to discuss the landscaping details for the eastern boundary where a retaining wall is proposed. For street trees, the discretionary permit must demonstrate compliance with Chapter 26 street tree standards, and staff is recommending adopting the HAC's recommendations discussed in the design review section above. Having street trees at 20-foot spacing plus additional screening, varying the spacing slightly between 15 and 25 feet on the east-west plane, and staggering trees on the north and south plane for a more natural look. For watershed health, the Class 2 wetlands located to the west and south of the property on lot 9, and a portion of the 50-foot watershed protection buffer extends onto lot 4. Existing vegetation must be retained to the degree possible during construction, and where it's not possible to retain, it must be restored. The Conservation Commission didn't comment on this application because their comments were addressed during the Rover subdivision, and relate to each individual lot created by that subdivision. Namely, their comments are that the Class 2 wetland buffer must remain in natural vegetation and must be demarcated on the site plan and on the ground with fencing and or boulders to prevent future disturbance. And then development on each individual lots required to obtain an erosion or submit an erosion prevention and sediment control plan. Specifically also related to this lot, it's going to require a significant amount of grading because the site is very sloped, and so the applicant is proposing to lower the elevation of the site by 14 feet and to construct a retaining wall along the eastern boundary to make that transition between the elevation on lot 3 and 4. So the erosion prevention and sediment control details are particularly important with all of the earth moving that's going to be happening on this lot. And the applicant's proposing to manage stormwater runoff on site, and a state stormwater permit will be required. For access, a curb cut onto Williston Road is proposed aligning with Munson Way. The proposed access has been approved by Vermont Agency of Transportation. The access is onto a state highway. A sidewalk is proposed along Williston Road frontage. The section of path will connect to the existing sidewalk on the U-Haul parcel to the east, and sidewalk connections are proposed between each building and the sidewalk along Williston Road. So staff is recommending the sidewalk along Williston Road extend to the western property boundary. And there is an opportunity to connect the proposed sidewalk to the sidewalk facilities being built or proposed to be built by Vermont AOT as part of their Route 2 Industrial Ave intersection improvements. And there is, I think, one additional landowner between the Vermont AOT sidewalk and this proposed sidewalk. So it'd be nice to avoid a gap in the sidewalk and to be able to connect those two sections of sidewalk. If possible. For traffic, the discretionary permit application must provide traffic generation data. This is the time when the DRB can request a traffic study. However, planning staff and DPW staff don't recommend a traffic study because industrial uses proposed typically generate a small number of vehicle trips, and the proposed curb cut is onto a state highway. For off-street parking and loading, the applicant is proposing to construct an initial 81 parking spaces and to reserve capacity to construct an additional 114 spaces if needed in the future. The parking requirements analysis is shown in the table below and is based on the total number of spaces, both spaces proposed immediately and potential future spaces. The table WDB 14A provides the DRB some flexibility in determining the required number of spaces for industrial uses because those uses are very diverse. And the number of proposed ADA spaces, outdoor and long-term bicycle parking spaces and end-of-trip facilities complies with the parking requirements of Chapter 14 as proposed. The applicant's proposing municipal water and sewer connections, utility connections must be underground. And discretionary permit application must demonstrate compliance with Chapter 15. Snow storage areas and solid waste enclosures are not shown on the site plan. Discretionary permit application must demonstrate compliance with Chapter 16 for landscaping, maintenance, snow storage, and solid waste. Outdoor lighting is proposed. The discretionary permit must demonstrate compliance with parking lot and outdoor lighting standards, including plans for dimming and motion sensing security lighting proposed. A master sign plan is required for multi-tenant properties and must be included. Master sign plan must be included in the discretionary permit application. And transportation impact fees will be assessed at the time of administrative permit. School and recreation impact fees aren't applicable because the project's non-residential. And I have drafted some recommendations for you to consider. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Patrick, are you the lead on this?
Sure.
All right. This is the first time we're seeing this project. Walk us through what. I just ask Emily to project
Okay, why don't you
whatever
project?
you would like and walk us through what you're doing.
Well, let's not bother with the existing conditions plan because it's all tree.
Yeah.
So let's go to the site plan, please. What you'll see, as described in the staff notes, are three rectangular commercial warehouse style pre-engineered metal buildings. And they are laid out basically in a way that we could take advantage of the site as best possible, i.e. putting as many square footage on possible. Including that is a shared loading dock area between the building that is perpendicular to in the building behind. So that was a design element that we hear planners talk about when it comes to industrial, this isn't the PUD, but industrial projects. So it's a shared area. Other than that, it's your pretty standard layout where we would have storefronts in the front of the buildings where the parking is, and all your loading docks in the rear of the building. The only exception being is, as mentioned, we have a shared loading dock in the rear there. So that's the only building where the loading docks are not in the rear of the building, but thankfully it's shielded from Route 2 by the building in front of it. This is what I still refer to as sketch. So we're not showing things like the snow storage area, et cetera, but we're very well aware of all the future requirements as we move forward with the project. In regards to the parking, what we did was we basically have what we're showing the front row of the parking paralleling. Yep. So you can see the difference in shading there. So what we're saying is we're going to build that if necessary, but we want approval now. We may not need it. And that's why I think it's referenced in the parking table that the shaded area is close to the buildings. We're going to build, that meets the requirements. But if we get a user that needs more parking, we want it to come back to and ask for more. We would just like the option to build. And it still meets all the setback requirements. One thing about this site that may or may not have been taken into consideration when the subdivision was approved and V-Trans approved this curb cut is there's quite a rise in elevation from Route 2 up into the site. So we have to, in order to have a relatively safe access, we have to lower this site. With that comes the need for a retaining wall along the property line of the adjacent U-Haul project. Thank you. We might be able, obviously we'll figure it out before the next step. We may be able to incorporate that retaining wall into the rear wall of this building. We just have to, we have to do some geotechnical work and hydrology work to make sure that we can do it. So that might be one thing that would be different from that. That may have been, I wasn't at the advisory meeting with Hack, but that may have been part of the discussion. So we're going to take a swing at that and certainly adhere to the landscaping requirements. In regards to the landscaping comments, certainly we will agree to the recommendation that landscaping along Route 2 be beefed up like U-Hauls. We will want to reserve to determine what type of landscape buffer between building B and U-Haul once we figure out that retaining wall. And we are not proposing to impact any of the class 2 wetlands or their associated buffer zones. We did recently, because the wetland delineation was running out of its 5-year term, we just recently hired a consultant to re-verify that that line is where it is, and it is. So that was taken care of. So we're safe there. We do have to think about outside storage, so you might see some of that here, but if we do propose any, it'll be in conformance with the ordinance. Same goes for lighting. Let me see, in regards to some of the other comments, I'm sorry for skipping around here. But some of the other comments in regards to the architecture, we do understand the dead wall comment. We'll try to address that with some bump outs. We also, thank you. We also understand that we might want to beef up the entrance, give the entrance some more presence. In other words, we understand you guys don't want just a long blank wall. But we didn't want to get too far in the design until we got some feedback from the boards. What you see here is a concept. Unfortunately, the image doesn't show it, but like most people nowadays, when you try to find out something, you go to your phone, your computer. That's kind of captures it a little bit. I saw this picture, and we are trying to source this type of panel. So it's a sandwich panel. And the intent of this is an actual building that was built, is that it starts darker by the ground, and it lightens up as you get taller. It is a really, really cool, effective look because it basically draws down the height of the building. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to achieve it or not. But I know this is just conceptual. But that was one way we thought.
Achieve it and meet your price points.
Achieve it to get actual source panels.
Actually
at
find the
appropriate
panels.
price point, yes.
Yeah, okay.
We do know that we don't want to actually follow the requirement in the ordinance which says that this building shall look like the ones around. Those kind of do it. But it's going to be, our goal is obviously it's the entrance to Williston kind of. We want it to be a really nice looking building, one that is attractive to the people that live in Williston, all the people that visit Williston, as well as the tenants that will be doing business there. Andy, is anything I'm missing that you want to jump in on? The sidewalk, we have to talk about the sidewalk.
Sidewalk and the trip facilities, just confirming that the board is okay with a common end of trip facility serving all three buildings.
Do you have any issue with that, Matt or Emily?
No, I think that works as long as it's within X number of feet. Within 600 feet, and I believe all those buildings are, so common facility is fine.
Okay.
And then the issue with the sidewalk is purely environmental.
Right, so between Williston Road, along all of Williston Road, along all of this section, with the exception of the old field drive going up into this property, which is right about where the cursor happens to be now. There's a fairly deep ditch, channel, stream along Williston Road, and the sidewalk is being proposed on the backside of that. Again, keep in mind that this property is going to be cut down to roughly, 320 to 324 elevation. So the path, the sidewalk ends now roughly where that Woods Road comes in. Extending it beyond that would either require placing fill in the wetland or moving the sidewalk over tight to Williston Road within the V-Trans right of way and adding fill, pushing the embankment out along the road. Either of which is going to, or both of those are going to involve work in the wetland and the wetland buffer. Not to mention that there's a water line along the shoulder of Williston Road on the project side as well. As Belinda mentioned, there's also 140 feet of frontage. It's on lot 9 between the westerly boundary of this parcel and the far westerly boundary of lot 9. So you've got this property, 140 feet, and then you get to the area where the bus pullout's being constructed as part of the industrial lab intersection agreements.
And do you have between the U-Haul property and this property, if you're talking about the sidewalk, that sidewalk for U-Haul, I think, is in at this point.
Yep.
There's going to be there's going to
It's
be.
partway down the slope.
It's partway down the slope.
Yeah.
But you're talking about going 14 feet from the top down. Are
In
you going to do a switch back down?
Nope, the sidewalk, I don't know, is it's 14 feet down, but we've looked at those grades and it's dual. It's not that far off from where the grade will be lowered to on lot 4. It's fairly well down that, kind of slab in down that slope on the U-Haul property. As you start from the U-Haul entrance and continue west, the sidewalk kind of holds its grade in relation to Williston Road as compared to the elevation of the site, which is relatively level. The sidewalk drops with Williston Road as it goes west.
Okay, we may have to, and we'll, once Andy puts it to paper, have to use that retaining wall as well to hold up some of that, to make that transition, but it looks worse when you're driving by than it is. That retaining wall on the corner, you see, we may have to radius that retaining wall a little bit more to help that transition, but it will be fine.
Can I just ask, can I
Retaining wall,
I'm sorry.
what's the height of that retaining wall?
I believe
What's the amount that will be exposed? Let's put it that way.
Approximately 14 feet on the inside.
Right, at the highest point, it'll be about 14 feet. It does drop as you get towards Williston Road, just because the grade's dropping off there, and we've got to transition down to the sidewalk.
Sure.
can I ask Andy a follow-up question on?
Yep.
So that sidewalk, it does terminate at the existing or the old farm road or the access road. Is your thought to not build that sidewalk ever, or is it? I understand. So you're trying to avoid the wetland impacts, and it's a difficult place to cross. But the idea is to eventually connect this all the way to Industrial Ave, right? So what's your thinking in terms of timing or phasing of that?
If I may, I'm going to go by memory. I mean, I can't, and I think I have it on my phone. I can look it up. Did we discover that there is not a sidewalk in those improvements on the south side of that intersection? Isn't the only sidewalk in those improvements on the opposite side of the street?
I think there's a short segment of sidewalk directly adjacent to the bus pull off. And it connects with a sidewalk to however far up Industrial Ave they're building it. This is all very localized because there's nothing, I don't believe it's connecting to anything further up Industrial Ave. There is some sidewalk much further down, and there's nothing further back on Williston Road. So while the Industrial Ave intersection project might be doing some sidewalk, it's a bit of an island once it'll be constructed.
Is the bus pull off for CCTA for local transit?
Yes.
So it's conceivable that people coming in on the bus could be getting off at that locale and walking up to these buildings.
Now, for point of clarification, unfortunately, I don't have the V-Trans plans in front of me. But I think the point is that what I don't think we want to do is build a sidewalk to nowhere. What I'd rather do is I would rather, have somebody, not me, tell us how much a sidewalk is going to cost. And if necessary, pay that to the town. Because what I've seen happen, and it's very dangerous, is if we put that sidewalk in, someone's going to walk down and then they're going to cross that road at an unsignalized area, and it's dangerous. I'm not trying to skirt the responsibility of building it. It's just it's a safety factor. And if there's another way that we could mitigate that circumstance, so when it's built, there's money in the kitty. So when the neighbor to the west comes in for a proposal and that gets built, there's money in the kitty to make the connection.
Yes, I would go back to my point in saying that if the bus drop off, the bus terminal, call it what you want, is dropping people off, then you're just making it harder for them to get to your property. And and warehouses don't have a huge amount of people working in them, but you're proposing 100,000 square feet. There's going to be a bunch of people working. And it's conceivable that a bus, that some of them will be taking a bus in.
And then, of course, there's also the possibility that we cannot obtain the correct environmental permit to make that connection.
Well, as you said, we're at sketch.
Yeah.
Right. Right, I mean, you might not be allowed to do it with the wetland there. Okay, so we're not gonna solve that tonight at this stage. Okay, anything else, Patrick?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the staff notes are refreshingly well put together. There was one question I did have. And it's one of those gray areas that I've run into before. In regards to the Architectural Advisory Committee memo, 22.3.1, respect the context. Consider neutral earth tones. Vibrant colors are discouraged. I think what I would just like is some clarification of what is referred to as vibrant. Because if we can pull off what I saw on Google, some people might say, well, that's vibrant, but it would be probably the stunning warehouse you've ever seen. I wouldn't think it was vibrant. I just think it was really nice.
I would encourage staff to provide some language on what you think of as vibrant.
Before you do that, can I make a comment? So, page seven, section 4, which you're referring to, Pat, gives the list of items that the board is going to want to see. It's up to you to follow that.
Sure.
The U-Haul building, the board spent a lot of time on varied roof lines, varied colors, what's vibrant, what's not vibrant.
Sure.
So I think that it's all kind of right here in front of you, and you got a good guideline to go forward with.
Well, I think,
And with that said,
I mean, would a better word be, we don't want bold colors? I'm just looking for some feedback before we really dig into.
Stay away from orange.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's read, let's.
All right, so I'll move
reignite
on, and we'll
that.
feel that out with staff. Okay. The next
So within, if you look at 22.3.1, respect the context.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a variety of industrial type buildings. And there's all kinds of different shapes and forms and colors. And I think the spirit is to just make it is to make it look like it's within the family of the buildings.
Sure.
Now, if you're going to upgrade and introduce something that's really special, I think this board would be excited about seeing that.
Sure. Okay. Next line down goes on to say, consider a brick or stone base. And I haven't gone up and touched it, but I think the material on New England Chimney Supply is fake. So is that?
Cultured stone.
Yeah, okay.
It's cultured stone, and it's
Just going-
and that's the spirit of what that was referring to.
Okay. These are just.
No, I would argue that you're so high on the elevation and the road's so down below, you may not even never see that in this location.
I don't disagree with that, but I was just talking to the spirit of which this is all for. It's not.
I would argue that these buildings, the town, I don't think the town wants, nor does the board want aircraft hangars. But so you're gonna want your renderings. Oh, yes.
Hey, this is sketch.
That's right, they're sketch.
They're really just
They look like
obviously
aircraft
there to
hangers.
show the mass.
Of course, but I think you're gonna want to really show a facade, with lots of, with some interest. You said in your opening statement, You know, this is the entrance to
Yeah.
Williston. We just put in a 50,000 square foot building. And with U-Haul times 2 floors, so 100,000 square feet. You're proposing 100,000 square feet on the ground. This is changing the character of of what's coming into Williston
Yes,
dramatically.
yes.
And to be the first thing, that this will become the first thing that anybody sees. So,
We accept the challenge and we're excited about
There
it.
you
I know my next question I can't find, and it is not meant to be smart, but I've been caught in this before. There is a requirement, let's go to the street trees. And if the street tree requirement in the regs say the street trees shall be, let's just say 50 feet apart. And if I have a condition that says they shall be 20, I'm conflicted. This happened to be in another town. So what happened with that town is the tree warden stuck his heels in because he did not want the trees that close together because they were just going to die. So I'm just looking for feedback. And if the ordinance says shall be 40, does that mean that they shall be 40 or they can be 20? Because I don't want to be caught in the gray area. And we don't have to answer this tonight. I'm just looking for feedback.
So at U-Haul, refresh my memory on what we did at U-Haul. I know it's written in here.
It's
but
20, they said 20
20
feet.
feet.
but isn't it varied? Didn't
It
we
was-
go
Yeah.
15 to 25
There
or
is a
something like
20
that? So it didn't look like it
Tree
was,
and landscape space
you know,
15
right.
to 25
Same-
feet on the
same
east-west plane and
increment. Yeah.
stagger on the north-south plane for more natural look.
Yeah.
And then some
Yeah.
lines separating.
So
I think that's
There's a
your answer.
condition of-
It's stagger them here,
Approval of
vary
the
the distance. We got a huge frontage. You just, some are 15, some are 25, some are.
But it's okay if they're not in conformance with what the ordinance tells.
Right,
Which is
here the
40.
recommendation is requiring more than what the bylaw
Okay, good.
is.
All right. Thank you very much.
A good
So
built
before I-
mural.
Over
good-
to DRB members for comments. This is an important project. You've recognized that. And please take due care with what you propose here because of its importance. And I know you folks are up to the challenge. You're already leaning forward with some alternative materials. And thank you for that. And I encourage more creativity. So with that, I'll turn it over to the DRB for questions.
Christensen here. If you were to look at the building in Milton that has a mural, that would help you potentially break up this huge space. And the second thing is with your retaining wall, where you're talking about attaching it to the building, you might be wanting to look very closely at the water area that the U-Haul is going to be thinking their water is going to vacate either. You're going to probably want a good French drain system along your retaining wall so it doesn't get eaten out, underneath. Other than that, we'll move on.
You,
Other questions?
How about comments?
Well, absolutely.
So a couple comments. I'll start again with the sidewalk from my perspective. I think since this is sketch plan, I'd like to see on the sketch that we're going to extend that sidewalk to the property line until you show that it can't make it. I think that has to be the starting spot. I like the idea of the retaining wall being engaged with the building. I think you're likely to create a pretty ugly space between the retaining wall and your building if you don't do that. And I think that's going to create security problems and all kinds of other issues that nobody's going to like. I guess I'll move into some questions. I'm not really understanding the parking piece. You said that you're proposing, I think, 81 spaces and suggesting or showing a future of another 100 and how many? Was that on there? It was a lot.
114.
Right, yeah, when I look at the site plan, I'm not coming up with anywhere close to that. So I'm not sure how where you would ever put those other 114 spaces, or why you would need them, or how they relate at all to the regulations.
So
So
Andy,
if you could maybe kind of clarify that what you're thinking is there a little bit would be helpful.
other general
While
questions?
Andy's gonna, he's counting the parking right now. One couple clarifications. So I get the message on the sidewalk, which means that we're gonna have to apply to fill the wetlands with the state and the Corps of Engineers. How does that affect this application as it relates to the Conservation Commission's request that we stay out of the wetlands? I'm assuming that the town is okay with that.
They are advisory to the DRB,
And so the DRB is okay with it.
so the DRB will talk about it.
Okay. All right.
Right, I mean, the comments that I made are my comments, not necessarily, I'm not speaking for the whole board here, so I think we'll deliberate on these, but I'm making them public at this point.
In regards to the retaining wall comment, I agree with your assessment that it would get a little murky between the wall and the building. And that was one of the reasons why we're thinking of trying to make this happen. But what that would mean is that when we meet with the fire department, we will not be able to have access around four sides of that building. And I also, I guess, seek clarification is, again, the fire staff has offered recommendations. We do plan on meeting with them to talk about it. But I just wanted to point that out to you that if we can pull that off, then we can't have access.
So they're not advisory to this board, right?
What is
Fire department.
The fire department isn't, but you're gonna have, if you were to incorporate that retaining wall into the exterior first floor wall of building B, you would have a non-combustible wall. It would essentially be a basement wall on the first floor on that side.
And they could access it via U-Haul.
And they could access it via U-Haul. So, because, fortunately, you're blessed with all sand there on that site. And so, Paul's concern, which is valid, is mitigated more easily in that sandy site.
Yes.
But it's, absolutely, you'd have to engineer that, and that's very doable. But you would have access to the eastern side of building B from the U-Haul property. It's just something for you to think about. And that would be kind of a weird little alley there.
Yes, it would be.
And Pete, I've never met a fire person who would have dared to drive their 100 or 150 or $200,000 truck in that alleyway while the building's on fire.
Yeah, I wouldn't see a vehicle going in that alley, but. Okay, other comments?
I was hoping to get some clarity on the parking. I didn't
Oh, yeah.
understand that.
Andy, are you ready to
Yeah,
talk
so
about
there's 81 spaces that are shown as being proposed.
that in the light gray?
Yes,
In the dark, oh, yeah.
those spaces plus the future spaces, there'd be a total of 114, not an additional 114. So if everything was built out on the site, there'd be 114 spaces, 112 to roughly 100,000 square feet is, a little bit more than one space per 1,000. So it's not that far off from the 1 space per 1,000 in table 14A.
Well, all right, well, okay. So, I mean, I counted, you're showing another 58 spaces here. Two sections up along the road and another section out by building C. And so that's a total of 139. So, but your intent is that only the spaces that you're showing on the plan would be the future spaces. Then there aren't additional spaces to that.
That's correct.
Okay. When this comes in for a DP, will there be specific uses and an ability to try to judge how many parking spaces are appropriate?
No, we will not have identified the tenants yet. Only the only uses we'll be able to use to calculate are the ones that are allowable uses in this zone.
All right, well, I'm not sure how we can decide how many parking spots you should be putting in then, but I mean, this is a huge range that you're asking for here. Not only that, but the number of end of trip facilities is dependent on how many parking spaces you put in, which was another question that came up earlier.
But the end of trip facilities could be based upon the maximum number of spaces that, because the end of trip facilities are a percentage of the overall parking.
Right.
You end up with 1 or 2 additional long-term bike storage spaces, or even
Right.
short-term storage spaces when you compare that 81 parking spaces versus the 114.
All right, again, I can't speak for the entire board, but I've never heard us complain about having too many of those. Yep, I'm sorry, Emily, what was that?
Tenant industrial. And basically the DRB's conditions of approval, because we didn't know any tenants in that building. And it was just, you better be comfortable with whatever number of spaces you provide and know that your tenants will have to comply with the required parking.
Yeah, I mean, if this is causing angst, we can just build them all.
No, it's not causing angst. I'm just trying to have some clarity on what you're asking for and thinking ahead to when we're asked to approve this and whether you're going to be asking for some huge number of parking spots or some very small number of parking spots compared to what the bylaws might say. So I'm just asking you to be clear when you come in with a DP of why you're asking for this many parking spaces and how you came up with that. So.
So
Go ahead.
if I, as a point of clarification, the town of Williston would rather see you provide for future parking expansion, get the total approved, exactly what you're doing, and build it later if you need it, because we don't want to seas of impervious material. And again, this site is unique in that it has great drainage and all that, but just as a philosophy, we don't want a whole bunch of empty parking lots.
And I think that's pretty much what Andy had told me, is why we came up with this.
Yeah. Okay, John, continue. You have other comments, please?
I do. So I do appreciate your stated purpose of creating an awesome, fantastic, beautiful gateway building on this site. I think that's an appropriate goal. I think with the size of these buildings, you've got a huge challenge in front of you. So I look forward to your solution to that. I'm not sure multicolored panels up into the sky are going to get there, but that's not really reducing the scale of that building very much. And those I think the renderings show that those are really big buildings. So I think you really need to pay attention to that moving forwards. We've talked a lot here in the past about where the parking goes on the site and trying to put buildings along the street fronts. I know this isn't down in the Finney Crossing area or Taft Corners, but generally, it's a nice thing to do, is to not have asphalt, seas of asphalt with either empty parking spaces or cars parked in front of the building. Yet I think the alternative here of switching it, the uses, actually makes the parking look pretty good compared to the loading docks. But I don't know if there's any way of reducing the amount of parking in front of the buildings on the site. I don't know if you've looked at that. It's just a random thought that generally I'd like to see less parking between the road and the buildings. I'm not convinced there's a good solution for that here, but the other comment I had was when I first saw this site plan, before I realized that retaining wall was there, is, I kind of like the idea that this site was up high compared to the road, because I've been past where U-Haul is, and the fact that there's a decent sized berm there actually helps. I mean, it doesn't totally screen the building, and it's not like you don't know there's a building there, but I think it does help to soften that edge between this giant building and the road. But now I hear that you're actually cutting the site down by what, 12 or 14 feet. That, I think that increases your challenge on the aesthetic issues that we brought up before. And I don't know if there's any way of trying to raise that up a little bit further or not. I'm sure that there's a lot of dominoes involved with that. I would like to see a rendering at DP of kind of from the sidewalk, because I think Scott brought this up before, that with the landscaping and the berm there and the difference in elevation, I think that's really how we want to see what this building looks like. The drone's eye view doesn't really represent anything that people are going to see or experience from the road. So those are my comments as we move forwards.
Thank you, John. So Patrick and team, I would encourage you to work with staff and take a look at some of the, well, Andy's going to be very familiar with this in terms of what was submitted for the U-Haul project, and which was very helpful, like a driver's perspective as you navigate on Williston Road. And if you could do something similar to what was done there, which is, I believe, what John you were referencing, that would be helpful. Other comments from DRB members? Dave Turner, you're on mute, I think.
I just wanted to make facial expressions. I agree with
Mission
John's
accomplished.
asking, but instead of doing it from the sidewalk, I think it should be done from the road, because I think the sidewalk's up about 10 to 12 feet higher than the road level is already. So I think it should be a road view instead of a sidewalk view.
I would view that as a friendly amendment to what I suggested.
Yeah, that's a good catch, Dave. Thank you.
And the other
Anything
thing I'd like to second, John's on the sidewalk extending all the way to the property line too. And I don't think that the wetland should be any concern, as we had in Cottonwood, when we had the wetland that was in the corner there that we weren't going to work around. And they worked with the Army Corps of Engineering and came up with a solution to make that one work. So I'm sure there's a solution here to a bridge or something that can work.
Do you know the section in Cottonwood we're talking about? And it's the Maple Tree Place Cottonwood interface along Williston Road. There are some cattails, there are some wetlands there. The section isn't long, but that was able to be navigated, and it has some similar characteristics to this.
V-Trans was involved in that too, so.
I don't know who was involved.
That might have been outside the right of way, but.
Clarification in regards to John's comment about the parking. I know that in other buildings I've done in Williston years ago, we were able to incorporate some employee parking in and around the loading docks in the rear of the buildings for that very reason. Is there any sort of standard or anything that we have to be aware of if we want to do that? I mean, like once we drill down and we know where the loading docks are, we're not gonna, this isn't a UPS facility, so it's not gonna be lined with loading docks. So there could be room for several employee spaces between the loading docks. Is that prohibited? That you're aware of or anything? Okay, good.
No. And that could enable you to reduce the parking in the front,
Yes,
maybe introduce some interesting landscaping.
put the building close to the road.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of could cascade into
Sure.
some positive things.
I mean, again, some of it might depend on whether these are these employees, who's parking in these spots? Is it employees? Is it visitors? Is it customers? Again, you're going to want to think about that as you locate the parking spots. You don't want the customers probably coming around the back and parking between the loading docks.
It would be what we've done in the past, is we put the employees in the back, the customers in the front.
Right, exactly. And the renderings and the landscaping are all going to, as Pete said, are going to play into that. And so would you show us give us the view from the road of what that's going to look like, and how much you can see the parking spaces. You know, if you can't see them anyway, then maybe it doesn't matter that they're in front of the building. So.
Other questions or comments?
I don't have any, Pete.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Okay, so I'm gonna open it up for public comments. I see a Jason Starr listed. Is that, do you have any comments or questions that you would like? I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't realize, Jason, you're a reporter, so you probably don't. Anyone else in the public domain?
No.
Okay. Any further comments or questions by the DRB? Any further comments by the applicant?
No, thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to close this hearing at 9:14. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pete, I'm going to step away for just 30 seconds and I'll be right back.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to go into deliberative session.
All right, I'm gonna put Jason Starr and Town Meeting TV in the waiting room.
Okay. Okay, October 12th, 2021. It is 10:02. The board is out of deliberative session. Is there a motion for DP 21-17?
Yes. As authorized by WDB 6.6.3, I, John Hemmelgarn, move that the Williston Development Review Board, having reviewed the application submitted and all accompanying materials, including the recommendations of the town staff and the advisory boards required to comment on this application by the Williston Development Bylaw, and having heard and duly considered the testimony presented at the public hearing of October 12th, 2021, accept the findings of fact and conclusions of law for DP 21-17 and approve this discretionary permit subject to the conditions of approval above. This approval authorizes the applicant to file final plans, obtain approval of these plans from staff, and then seek an administrative permit for the proposed development, which must proceed in strict conformance with the plans on which this approval is based. We're going to adjust a couple of the findings of fact and conclusions of law, as well as conditions of approval. Starting with the findings of fact number 4, we're going to change the second sentence to say the proposed use, studio and 1-bedroom multifamily units managed by an affordable housing nonprofit, is similar to a senior living facility for the purposes of the parking calculation. We're then going to adjust change condition of approval number 9A to read per WDB 14.2.3, 106 plus or minus, depending, or which, this is hard to read, Emily. 106 plus or minus, which parentheses may vary for ADA parking, end parentheses, on-site parking spaces is approvable. The on-site parking is sufficient to satisfy the parking needs. The parking table provided at final plans shall not include on-street parking in the calculation. And I think those are all of the adjustments we were going to make.
Thank you, John. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Scott Riley seconds it. Any further discussion? Yay or nay, please. Paul Christensen,
Yay.
John Hemmelgarn,
Yay.
Scott Riley,
Yay.
Dave Saladino,
Yay.
Dave Turner,
Yay.
and the chair is a yay. Motion carries 6 in favor, none opposed. Is there a motion for DP 21-19 GPA LLC?
As authorized by WDB 6.6.3, I, Scott Riley, move that the Williston Development Review Board has reviewed the application submitted and all accompanying materials, including the recommendations of the town staff and the advisory boards required to comment on this application by the Williston Development Bylaw, and having heard and duly considered the testimony presented at the public hearing of October 12, 2021, accept the recommendations for DP 21-19 and authorize the application to move forward to discretionary permit review. We are adding recommendation number 7 that states the applicant shall provide photo simulations from the driver's perspective of the buildings along Route 2. I paraphrase just a little bit there.
Why don't you reread that?
Yeah, okay. So the applicant shall provide photo simulations from the driver's perspective along Route 2.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Dave, any further discussion?
No.
Okay, Paul Christensen, yay or nay?
Yay.
John Hemmelgarn,
Yay.
Scott Riley,
Yay.
Dave Saladino,
Yay.
Dave Turner.
Yay.
The chair is a yay. 6 in favor, none opposed, motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes of September 14th, 2021?
Make a motion.
Riley makes a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
I'll
Second.
second.
John Hemmelgarn seconds it. Any further discussion?
No.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously, 6 in favor, none opposed. Before closing the meeting, is there anything else?
Yes.
John,
I would like to welcome Simon to our meetings. I have not met Simon yet, and he didn't even once turn on his camera. I don't even know what he looks like.
That's not, I can treat
I
it.
saw him one time.
Did you? Anyway, welcome, Simon.
Mask and everything.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
You're turning red.
Yeah. You're not a joke of a hat.
that, so,
You're born red.
yeah, I was born red and I remain red. Any other comments?
Question. Do we hold on to our DP 21-19 20, or is there going to be a new one?
Yeah, I would hold on to that because they'll probably just slip seat something.
And
So I can, go ahead, Paul.
second note is I will be available for the 26th remotely, so there's at least one of you in for the Vermont thing.
All right, so I can put this this application that we continue tonight up there with the UPS envelope I have up on the shelf I can see right now. Is that right?
UPS envelope's gone, isn't it?
Yeah,
Is that officially dead?
That's officially
You
dead.
can recycle that one.
Yeah.
All right, excellent.
Toilet paper, fire starter.
That's a good idea. I have a fire pit out back.
Okay, anything else? All right, thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
See you in 2 weeks.